May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be free from harm. May all beings love life. May all beings awaken. Welcome to another Cuke Audio podcast. I pray that you and yours are safe and comfortable, free from economic hardship, and able to get out and do whatever it is you want within the limitations of the universal precept of do as little harm as possible. So today we have a Life in Bali podcast, and we have a guest, Jonathan Haak. And he's a Brit. He's had a very interesting life. He's going to tell us some of it. We're going to do another one with him. Highlights. He was a really good athlete when he was young, had physical problems, got into his family's farming business, but it was animals, cows, very high quality cows, selling embryos around the world. And then he, as a coincidence, got into the movie world. And it's pretty interesting sort of things he did, and that brought him to Asia. And then he came to Bali 12 years ago. He talks about Al-Anon 12-step programs. And so let's just give him a call. And we'll see what else he has to say. Okay.
Join. Pitch.
There we are.
I've got you.
Yeah, I hear you.
Brilliant.
Very good. Yeah. All right. Well, so Jonathan, what is your family name?
My family name is Haak, Haak.
Yeah, that's what I didn't know if it was your real name or something you just used for Facebook.
No.
So how you doing, Jonathan?
Pretty good. Yourself?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I've been pretty busy today.
Exhausted after your first call.
Yeah, my first call was about an hour and 50 minutes to America.
Long one.
That was a good one. So, how long have you been here in Bali?
I've been here for 12 years.
Oh, really? Wow.
I came for 3 weeks to but to be present for a daughter who was partying a bit heavily on one of the islands, Trawangan. And my 3 weeks turned out to be an extended stay. I enjoyed the energy over here and stayed.
Wow.
I was able to stay, so I stayed.
Yeah. So, what have you been doing since you came here?
Well, I'm retired, and I come out of the out of production in film business, and done a lot of traveling, and landed here. And I have to say, for the first time in my life, it felt like home. It felt like a home to me. And as a result, I extended my 3 week stay to, I think, a month or something, and then 2 months, and then started to get exposed to Al-Anon and Coda that didn't exist at the time in Bali. And that is what I was using up quite a lot of my time in England with, was establishing Coda in London. And
what is Coda?
Coda is 12 steps applied to primarily the relationship you have with yourself. And
codependent, that's what Coda comes from, huh?
Exactly. And it just works on the 12 steps and works out how you're able to communicate with others in a different way of managing your reactions to them, so that you're yourself in their company rather than needing or wanting to say something to gain some form of control or loss or sadness or whatever. So it was nice to see when I first came, the active AA and NA, but there were very few Al-Anonis, and there was no coda at the time. And as a result, it was very similar to what I came back from America, from rehab, which I did in south of North America. I went in for codependency when my wife and a child went into rehab for substance abuse, and one alcohol and one was substance, cocaine.
Mm-hmm.
And
why don't you explain what Al-Anon is?
well, Al-Anon is a mistake, I think, that was born out of Bill W's, one of the founding members of AA, wife Lois, became aware that once the alcoholic became not in recovery, basically, often the value of being or the need to be present or feel that one was of value disappeared, and quite a lot of depression was found and confusion in the family of origin. And they then set up Al-Anon, which they discovered if applying the same 12 steps that are done in AA to how life was affected by living with alcoholism in the family, it delivered recovery of, I'm called an Al-Anonic if I end up in an AA meeting.
I want to say one thing. When you say when a addict or alcoholic is not in recovery, what you're talking about has relapsed, right?
Yeah. Basically, with substance, the individual that, whether they are using or not, becomes affecting the environment, the presence, and the way in which the person, the next of kin, normally a husband or a child or a father or mother, one of the family, close, significant other, they are affected in the way they learn how not to be themselves, but how to be of value through another person. And both Al-Anon and Coda concentrate on the plight, if you like, the condition of the significant other than the person who's either using or not. It's a substance. And that's how Al-Anon came into being, is through Lois, the wife of Bill W. And she found with a few others that it gave the same freedom from past behavior patterns and ways of thinking and ways of dealing with their addict, so-called addict or alcoholic, that freed them from the compulsion to think there was no life other than that centered around the substance and the person who's suffering the addiction to substance. So they learned how to gain a new freedom through the steps and changing the way in which they dealt with their way of how they reacted to people, places, and things around them, but primarily to their next of kin who is suffering addiction to initially alcohol, and then it applies to all the addictions now, obviously. But initially, Al-Anon was for significant others that were attached or came out of the family of an alcoholic.
Tell us how your life has progressed. You know, I know some about it. The oldest thing I remember when you talked about it is you were working with horses in England. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I started, basically, I went to a school in Glastonbury for sporting ability. I had I was way ahead of others in terms of how I hit a ball. And Millfield was a specialist school that created some of the best sportsmen, not only of England, but from around the world, in so far as that the academic side was crammed, and that left 6 hours a day to do whatever sport it was. And mine was rugby initially, and in the first match for the team, under 12s, I think it was, under 13s, I did my cartilages quite seriously in my knee, so that both the lateral, but 3 or 4 operations on my knee, and that put me out of contact sport. And strangely enough, an extraordinary decision that was not hampered by, and should have been, by myself and the trainers that were getting me better from my knee operation. I took up tennis as being the obvious solution to non-contact sport, but of all of the all of the sports to pick, it's probably the most devastating to the body. And I went on the mini circuit as a wannabe in between 14 and 17. And, you know, we had international sides coming to our school. In fact, we thrashed the pants off a guy called Bjorn Borg at the time, when he was a bad-tempered, he was as good as McEnroe, that was for sure. And and the next time I came anywhere near the bloke was 17 years old, and I couldn't have got a game off him. He had zipped his lip, and he concentrated on being in the moment 100%. And funny enough, I kind of wish I had come into recovery a little earlier and utilized some of the primary step 1 stuff to help me keep my focus of attention, or raise my focus of attention on limiting damage, and therefore letting go of my compulsion to have a feeling or a thought-based feeling or triggered feeling, and whether I was winning or losing, and just concentrate on being in the moment in order to do the best I could according to the practice I had put in with my set of DNA and equipment for playing sport. I was lucky. We had a guy, David Hemery, who was he was a gold medalist at Mexico, I think it's Mexico Olympics, for high hurdles, and he was the guy that was teaching us how to deal with endurance and our thinking. And what he shared with us, I never understood at the time, was that as he was coming around the last bend in that final, he moved his thinking, which he had practiced, down to his big toe in order to disenfranchise the power of any thought or feeling that the tape or his competitors were giving him, so that he could just do what he did in practice and do the best he could at doing that without the mind getting in the way. Because once the mind starts to have a thought and then a feeling of fear or of power, it becomes omnipotent and will affect the way in which one manages one's basically way of being in a race, in competition, or in life. Strangely enough, as the simply like I said, I just wish I had learned if I'd utilized some of this stuff when I was playing tennis, it would have helped me to start off with choose not to play tennis and probably play something like golf or cricket as being most user-friendly for my body. And bearing in mind what my actual loves were, which were hidden at the time, but I was definitely involved with, was music and guitar, basically. And I love literature, words. I would have probably gone down that avenue, but it was not to be. And when I came back from the sugar circuit with a broken down body from tennis, I never played tennis again. I realized or discovered that my mum and dad had a farm, and on it they were breeding horses and Limousin cattle from France, which are now the #1 beef animal of the world. And I loved animals and inherited from my mother quite a knowledge that she drained into me, basically, or shared with me on the behavior of DNA, basically, in terms of how it worked in livestock, which is, strangely enough, almost identical to how it works in humans, and or it has a lot of similarities. And so I spent the next 15 years or so on a farm where we were exporting fertilized embryos around the world. We were into North America, South America, South Africa, and I was traveling around with these eggs and implanting them into local ordinary cattle, range cattle. And therefore, the animal that came out, which was a purebred Limousin, was able to gain the antibodies required for it to survive to the best of its ability in the environment that it was born into. And they did really well. But BSRE came along and whacked that on the head. And once we got through our last lot of...
Wait, BSRE, what's that?
That's a form of, not unlike COVID as a virus, it was called mad cow disease.
Oh, yeah.
The mad cow disease curtailed all of we had a little place, not a little place, a tank in Mauritius that didn't have any cattle at the time. It was an island off Mauritius. And we could export these, share the embryos, the fertilized embryos that were in a nitrogen tank with whoever until BSRE came in, when we couldn't refill the tank anymore from the non-surgical embryo transfers that we were utilizing on our top females. And the top females were brought in out of basically the top grandchildren, female grandchildren from the top producers in the Massif Central in France, mountainous region, where this beef cow, Limousin, was a little smaller than a Charolais or Simmental or some of the other what we called exotic cattle at the time. They were coming in at about 900 to 1,000 kgs at 18 months to 24 months. But their bone, lean meat to fat ratio, covering fat, was very limited, yet they were known as the Angus of France in terms of restaurant eating, because they had a fine marbling that made the meat very easy to use by your top chefs. And this happened around the world. But the other thing they had is they were wild as hell. The females were hugely good mothers in terms of being able to cope with life. So the calves that came out had the same thing. The minute they could move, if you didn't deal with them vaccines and stuff fairly rapidly, you stood a double chance of basically landing up in a heap on the floor short of oxygen, or with a pair of horns either side of you. That's if you're lucky enough for them to go either side of you, from the mum who's chasing you. So
Wow.
hence they did really well around the world when competing with Angus and Hereford, who had already decimated the size of an animal through showing. Really, the Angus was brought down in size, and the Hereford never had a quality of beef that was competitive with the Angus. Yet the Angus started to utilize basically Holstein crosses to give them the leg and the size to compete in the shows of North America, where you could gain anything up to a couple of mil for a top bull.
Yeah. Hey, I remember you telling me something about vaccinations and or vaccines and all that with horses or cattle, or was it just cattle or what?
Cattle. And the vaccinations that what we learnt when we were involved with the embryo transfer was that in order to get through the paperwork required to enter another's country as a viable unit of fertilized embryo, you had to have a history of power in terms of immunity in the parent. And since vaccination had crippled Europe at the time as far as bovine export was concerned, especially France, their main breeders were unable to export anywhere other than a country that didn't use vaccination on its cattle. Otherwise,
because they didn't use vaccination, right?
If they didn't use vaccination, you could identify the sick ones very rapidly, but you had to be very careful with that in terms of transmission. And so, we had about 3 or 4 different units whereby an animal would, long before we used embryos off it, would be proven to have the genetic DNA information that was required by the market. It then also had to survive our immunity system, whereby a imported calf could be unvaccinated when going to England. And therefore, we were able to identify whether there was any risk in transmission of any of the nasty diseases with the eggs that we could prove by documents from the animal that we were exporting genetic information in a vaccinated, not a vaccinated, a fertilized embryo. We could prove that it was what it was and where it came from by the genetic information, and it as a reason because it was not vaccinated, we could identify whether it was in danger of being transmitting anything else that was, foot and mouth, or there was can't remember what it was called. There was a nasty virus that they managed to deal with. As a direct result of being able to segregate and make sure that you don't treat an animal as being clean unless it is proven to be so by being on its own somewhere. And then there was a period of time, 18 months, that would determine whether it was valid or not. And we actually never had a, they all went through. We never had, and yet our neighbors who were dealing with all of the normal vaccinations at the time, and it wasn't vaccinations so much, the biggest problem in actual fact in terms of drug use from medicine, from the veterinary practice, was the misuse of penicillin. And penicillin took away power of immunology. So you had a problem that was growing without anybody knowing it in the misuse of the cure-it-all penicillins of the time. They were what created the weakness in the calves and in the bovine industry, if you like, at that time. And we were again very lucky. Like we had a vet that ended up staying in one of our cottages on the farm, and he was a top guy from Cambridge, and he was a very good surfer as well. he took his family around the farm around the world doing locums, and he discovered
What's locum?
He became vet in Singapore, in Vietnam, in Australia, in around the world, basically, and studying all different ways of managing the growth of bacteria and virus, viral infections and bacterial infections in horses primarily, but also cattle and small animals. And he had worked out by error, rather by trial and error, that he made a mistake on one occasion with a very expensive thoroughbred, where he was able to utilize something that the Aboriginals used, which was if you were going to get something sick better, it would be very good to introduce mum's blood into it with a multivit.
Multivit? You mean multivitamin?
Yeah, it's there's a name for it, but I'm terrible with my memory on the name. But
that's all right. That's all right. Just keep moving.
It's a fluid basically that contains all that's required to survive. So you would put it on a drip of these two things for about 6 hours, and the animal would create antibodies that were so much more powerful than the ones invading the cells in the animal that was suffering the disease, if you like, the invasion of the bacteria or the what do you call it, the virus. Then you had this animal that would get better, that 60% were dying, simply dying. And he was getting, we were getting a 95% plus survival from things like pneumonia, diarrhea, all of the things that wipe out animals through viral infections in an overcrowded situation that is the norm for agriculture, for production of milk or beef. And with horses, really interesting that the racehorse industry, which was very, very valuable animals, were being misfed in a way to create massive reserves of energy to burst forth over a quarter of a mile or whatever they were being bred for. And, you know, I used to go with him at night because he couldn't get anyone to help work with him. Well, we cut open these bellies and get rid of the colic. And then he would be utilizing, wherever it was possible, mum's blood and the drip.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so that was the farming. And then the farming went tits up, basically, with BSRE. We couldn't continue at that time. And I gave my house to my mum and dad at the time, which in retrospect wasn't such a great move. But anyway, I did. Ended up in a caravan camp with my children and my wife, who unbelievably stuck with me. And I got a phone call from a guy that was just back off Sticky Fingers. He was the son of our local family doctor, basically. And he'd just come off the Rolling Stones tour of America and had got himself onto heroin and cocaine. And his father was trying to clean him up. And he said, "Your photographs are beautiful, Jonathan. My brother's over here he's also English and also called Jonathan, is doing a film, and they need a photographer. And can you get your body on a train and go up to Glasgow where they'll meet you?" And I said, "Well, how much are they paying me?" I was getting about 150 quid a week from doing God knows how many hours riding a bike around with a load of tennis balls on the back. And unless I moved up to London next door to one of the big clubs, I was never going to be able to get back in the housing market or continue anything other than what I was doing. So I said,
wait a minute, tennis balls? What are you saying?
Well, in between when the farm collapsed, if you like, I took up. I'm a tennis pro, so I had all the credentials to go and teach tennis. But teaching tennis in English countryside is not great.
Yeah.
You've got to go to Queen's or Wimbledon and join one of the big clubs, and then you get a good income. But it was really through this guy saying, "Listen, Jonathan, he's going to pay you £200 a day. Just get on the bloody train and go up there." And I'm earning £200 a week, and I'm saying, "I'm there."
Yeah.
So I got on the train with God knows how many damn cameras, and I'm met by Jonathan in Glasgow station. He said, "Jesus Christ." He offered to carry my bag, and I said, here it is. And he said, "What have you got in there?" And he said, "Jonathan, there is no need for anything that has any idea about a camera on this shoot that we're doing." And I said, "Oh, and what's going to be my job?" And he said, "Well, your job is to become a driver." So I said, and how much money do I get for that? You know, otherwise I go on the train and go straight back home if I'm getting 50 quid, because I still earn more doing the bloody tennis. And anyway, he said 200 quid per day. And I said, "Okay, I'm here, I'll do it." And he said, "Something I hadn't told you is you've got to drive Dudley Moore." And I said, "What?" Yeah, he's my, childhood plus adult hero, one of my heroes. Peter Cook and Dudley Moore were pre-Monty Python and amazing.
Peter who?
Peter Cook and Dudley Moore.
Okay, go on.
And the guy running a Tesco's ad was called Ridley Scott, and he was going through a divorce at the time with Mary Watson, who took a shine, not physically, I don't think, to me, certainly wasn't mutual, but she liked the fact I was a fixer, basically. As a farmer, if there's a problem, you deal with it. And you don't get too excited about it because they're happening all the time. And that was the opposite, if you like, to what she was used to in film industry. And especially when going through a divorce with her husband, who was egomaniacal genius. And
wait a minute. Who was her husband?
Her husband was a guy called Ridley Scott, who made a lot of money.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know who Ridley Scott is. I just had lost track of that.
Blade Runner and pre.
Oh, I know who Ridley Scott is. Aliens.
Yeah, well, he created the foundation with Blade Runner. That was Mary Watson managed to put a bit in his mouth in order to get the job financially completed in anything under 20 years. I mean, he was an egomaniac. I mean, he was so perfectionistic and determined, and if you crossed him, God almighty help you. And but anyway, I learnt a lot with her and was utilized by them to go to third world countries, which I'd already had some sort of experience with the cattle, and consequently was like a fixer. I'd look after helping them and the location team produce in third world, in difficult scenarios where your people like Ridley and company would go to pieces the minute they're in Namibia and the bloody desert kicks up a 2-week sandstorm or something. That sort of scenario would destroy an awful lot of professionals that were that made their names in either Soho or LA or New York. And so you had this farmer fixer who learned very rapidly about the basics of how to get the most out of a buck. In terms of completing a project with with film. And
let me ask you something here.
Go.
What about Dudley Moore? You've already left him behind.
Oh no, Dudley. He was an up and downer. Dudley. He was a very easy man for me to get on with. I really enjoyed his company, as I did with Ridley actually and Mary. They introduced me. For whatever reasons, I got on with all of them, and I was fascinated by making films. The minute I got introduced to it, and Dudley was fascinated by really people that I was very good with. So we got on that, and I got him in the car every day, and we were looking for a free-range chicken around England, I think it was, but there weren't many of them at the time. And Dudley was the person.
Why were you looking for a free-range chicken?
Because they were just doing this free-range food was going into Tesco.
I see.
It was an advert for one of those. I can't remember what it was for now, because it was endless then. It was most of your pop. Paul Wayland and him and both the Scott brothers and Jake, the son, they all made most of their money off Mercedes-Benz, BMW, and advertising was what paid the money basically in order for them to go and utilize their genius on and what they practiced on short shoots that told a story with 7 to 110 seconds or 20 seconds to tell the story. So they learned very rapidly how to hook an audience rapidly and then string it along in the way you develop the characters in a very short period to attach value to the brand that you were advertising. And it was a fantastic template for making, how you develop characters to tell a story in a film, because you could hook your audience in a number of ways that you could practice alternative options, if you like, that you'd never had the money for when you're doing a shoot, when you're doing a film. Mm-hmm. And the advertising per foot of film or meter of film, you had literally 15 times the money with the people that we were working with. And basically the agencies at that time and now were utilizing the top camera and lighting men, the top directors, the top this, the top that in the film, because they could relate with the effect that a beautiful advert had on their brand and their product sales. So it was again, I was lucky to be in that environment in the 80s. This was 80s through to 98 or something. And if you minus 89 out of it, it recovered quickly after a crash in 89. But these guys were outside the bracket. They were always in demand. So always had a job, if you like, as a fixer or producer in third world countries. And and then my body packed in again. I'd already had a operation.
Which buddy?
My one. My body.
Your body.
Yeah,
your body.
Okay. An operation on my ankle to stop it twisting, so it didn't have a rotation. It didn't have a universal joint anymore. It had a two-way joint. It had a single 180 up and down, but it couldn't twist, and therefore I could continue walking basically. But I've got these three bits of metal in my foot, and that's what stopped me continuing. I'm not sure whether, I think I was ready to stop anyway. I was looking for alternatives at that time, but God knows where that would have taken me. But as a result, after that operation, I ended up getting on a plane due to my daughter. And my wife had already gone into recovery and was enjoying good recovery. And my daughter wasn't quite the same. She was doing it her own way in spite of 2 years in America and England in various different rehabs that she would continue to party in. I mean, wherever you put her. But she was
you said she was on Gili Taranga. That's the party island.
Absolutely.
Over there.
She found it sort of.
We went to Gili Air. The one that's better for senior citizens.
Definitely more relaxed, and it's lovely. It's a bit like Sanur, where I am now. Is when I first came to Bali, I'd heard so much, sleepy Sanur, and you've got to be plus 70 or something before you even dream of going there. And by mistake, when we were looking to stay here, having gone in and out and set up a business based in Bali, at the end of seeing all of this stuff around Seminyak and Truangan and all, not Truangan, Perinan, through there, there was this.
Let me just briefly explain that Tenigan is an island, one of the three Gillies off Lombok, which is the next island east over from here. And the Gillies are, a lot of people go from here to the Gillies for a week. Well, Katrinka and I had our honeymoon, 11 days on Gili Air. Oh,
Beautiful.
wonderful. Yeah.
What a place to have it. I mean, it's like parts of this island that, is it Trawangan up in the north? I went up there once with Annie I think it's Trawangan. It's on the north coast, and there's I think it's a German hotel there that's like caught in the late 80s, and you've got this beautiful idyllic scenario that was like Bali used to be, 20, 30 years ago. And it's which you will have had it's like Minnow and all those, apart from Trawangan, the
Gili Minnow.
Minnow. And, they had everything that this island had, but there was nobody there. So you could live the natural nature life, if you like.
Yeah.
On a tropical island. It was lovely.
Yeah. One thing about Gili Air, I can't help but think about tidal waves, because the highest point on it is what? The highest point is the mosque. And I thought I would convert to Islam immediately if there was a tidal wave and get over there. But one nice thing about it is it being Muslim is, pardon me, there were no dogs, and there were no motorized vehicles. They had these what were they, donkeys or mules or something they tortured with their carts. I don't know. Anyway, but you could walk across the island in 10 minutes.
Brilliant.
And it was you could walk around it in, well, they would say 40 minutes. To me, it was an hour. But I rode a kayak all the way around. It took me about 4 or 5 hours. And there was a really rough spot, but a lot of it was just totally smooth. Anyway, it was fun.
Right.
So wait. So you went from the being involved with helping smooth things out in the movie business when they'd hit a third world country to come here. Now, I remember you telling me some stuff about the smoothings out. Can you give us a picture of what sort of behavior you'd be dealing with, expectations from the film crew, the way they did things, and then what you would try to do in terms of dealing with the locals? I think one thing you told me was they get in trouble, they get arrested, they get, various things like that. Can you give us a picture of that?
For sure. Yeah, my experience with a friend who was exporting something completely different was there's a system, a bit like with agricultural contacts prior to going in with your animal. You create a relationship with one other who is local to the area and connected to the army, the public banja, the local politic, and the police, and also the mafia. So that if I was going to be involved with a shoot that was shooting in, say, somewhere like Canggu, I would go and see cadets.
You mean Canggu here?
Yeah. As an example, I would, prior to the event, get on a plane and come down in order to talk with local people, in order to identify how the mafia worked, how the police worked, and who I needed to pay money to in order to be able to get people out without being stuck with them in jail or the whole crew in jail for one reason or other. There was a situation in Thailand where, not Thailand, in Vietnam, North Vietnam, where I can't remember which James Bond it was now, but it was a James Bond film being done in those beautiful waters where you have the mounds, the little mountains that come out of water, and
Oh, wonderful. Oh, yeah, I love them. They're so gorgeous.
beautiful area there. And I
Yeah.
can't remember the name of the area, but I was working on something else in Hanoi, and Hanoi was not the place you went to post the war. It was only sort of 5 or 6 years after the war, and a lot of people were getting a misconception about safety of working there. But this crew had gone in there primarily with American production, and they had got themselves surrounded by the local mafia/army, and they knew I had a reputation in Vietnam already from doing a number of TV ads over there. And the producer I'd already met down in Ho Chi Minh, Saigon, and he said, I don't know what to do, Jonathan. I think I fucked it. And I said, hang on, I'll be with you in whatever it was, 3 hours, 4 hours, and to get there. And on arrival, I said, right, I will speak to their main man. We need to get out of here now. And this guy looked at me, went white, and he was thinking of all the money he was going to lose. I said, forget about the bloody money, because you're not going to have any if you don't get out now. And I've got friends, we had a couple of friends that used to look after all of the work that I did in that area, Southeast Asia. And I said, they have the identical locations you require to carry on a seamless continuity of the in Thailand, in southern in the islands in Thailand. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's what they did. We got them out, and nobody really knew what was going on, including the locals, which was great because I had their Minister of Culture, who I was living with at the time. He picked me up from the airport on his Brumfits, and he was a lovely guy who was fascinated by film. And the great thing about Vietnam, both North and South, is they've just inundated with serious ability in terms of making film. They had the French there before, so anything to do with art, they were rich. You know, they knew how to do it. So, and if they didn't mind telling you straight away, and you'd be able to share with them whatever was trying to be achieved, and they become part of your team then, which is the opposite of what this guy who was managing the shoot, a much bigger shoot, up in the northwest of the island of Vietnam. But it was, so my first job when I arrived in Saigon was to set up a meeting with their ministry, their Minister of Culture, in order to start to understand how to make a decent film in Vietnam, in North Vietnam. And he said, God Almighty, we've been waiting. There've been some beautiful films made in Vietnam, and with what I learned from them, he became part of my team, if you like, or I became part of his team, more to the point. And it meant that the army and the people that had been causing trouble with the other crew were the opposite with us, but they had received financial remuneration prior to the event, which was part of our budgets when filming in Third World, was always to involve the local police, army, or politics to avoid some of the disasters and tragedies that occur on shoots in Third World, because a lot of deaths happen as a result of basically physical, not anybody killing them, but physical mistakes that had they talked with local people, they wouldn't have been allowed to get anywhere near a cliff or a, soft ground that sucks you in and stuff. They would be there to help you, simple as that, and take you in. I mean, this guy in Vietnam, he introduced me to his whole family. I became part of his family whilst we were dealing with the top people in LA and Soho, the top directors and stuff that wanted Vietnam, for some reason, had a phenomenal pull to it. And Southeast
but you
Asia.
said you had to leave. What? You had to leave and go to Thailand because there was some problem. What was the problem?
I didn't have to leave. The guys that had started to try to control the local people, which was a completely different project that was out there when I was out there, but I had met their head man, had wanted a meeting with me in Saigon. So they had to get out. And when they called me up in trouble, I visited their shoot and within 5 minutes said, you need to get out of here now. Otherwise, you are likely not to exist as you are right now. And money, not a point. They're quite, Southeast Asia, if you go against them, they suddenly one person becomes 500 and you don't know what the fuck to do.
Hey, so what did they do that was so bad that they had to leave?
They went in there like your average LA producer. You fucking do this, otherwise I'm never going to pay you a fucking penny. And
right.
The minute you start hierarchical behavior, which is the whole of the film industry is hierarchical.
That's right.
You have funny people often at the top, and that's what this man had done, but he did it to the wrong person, and the wrong person had the head of the army, and they're not going to mess around. If somebody starts fouling their patch and the way in which they're behaving, because he didn't stop, he was losing money, so his mind was completely caught up with his project. And what he didn't think is that he could be wiped out, or certainly half of them could have been, or they'd be in jail, which is not a great, Hanoi Hilton is not a great place.
Well, people, I can understand this. I've been my little tiny bit of experience around film and music business. I've seen really, really awful behavior in America. And you just can't do that in Asia. And not here, not in Thailand. In Thailand, they have a saying, there's a fine line between the smile and the knife.
And it's not one bloody knife. There's dozens of them that start appearing from everywhere.
Yeah, well, people here are polite. That's basic. I mean, wouldn't you agree? You deal politely and respectfully with people. You don't raise your voice. You don't make them look bad. You don't embarrass them.
Yeah.
You don't blame them for things. Sometimes you have to bite your tongue because that's not where we come from.
That is so right, David. I think there's been a couple of films made, but there's certainly room for several more in terms of the dichotomy of desire and ways in which to manage a group of people in somebody else's, syndrome at their house, in their patch. You go in there either to invade them, which we have a history of, and find it very difficult to not behave like the knowledgeable one. And if you start to behave like that, they've got a smell. They smell. They can't understand a bloody word, half of them, but they look at you and can tell by the tension in you, basically. how they're going to behave and whether they need help with dealing with you, etc., etc., etc. I mean,
Yeah.
Bali can create the same reaction if you're not careful. If you start to go up against any one of them, if you're running a business and you don't pay your tax or your so-called tax, I've been present several times when in comes Lascar, which is the younger brother of Kadek, who used to run the club in Double Six, and who's a charming, soft. He's a charming man, but his brother is slightly different. And they come in with bloody baseball bats, and if there are any heads to be broken, they'll do that. But basically, they disappear.
Wait a minute. Who comes in?
But they're a group called Lascar Bali. Which
Lascar. All right. So Lascar, it's a lot weaker now, is my understanding. But it is the top gang in Bali that I've seen. 8 years ago, it was listed as one of the 4 strongest gangs in Asia.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the time I saw it in action in Seminyak with, French owners of restaurants that were trying to be clever. And their whole place would be taken to the ground, simple as that. And if they caused further trouble, then they would be on a boat and that would be it.
I've been around mafia in Japan, and I've been around Lascar here. And you know the difference? The mafia people in Japan, they don't want to acknowledge I exist. They won't respond. They'll look straight ahead. They don't want anything to do with impure foreigners. I stepped into a hot tub once with my son that had a bunch of mafia guys in it. Every one of them stood up and got out immediately. We'd made the water impure. The Lascar guys here were nice, polite.
Yeah. Absolutely right. I mean, Japan, Jesus, they I think, what's his name? Clint Eastwood did a lovely couple of films on.
I know what you're talking about.
I can't remember the name of the films, but it was, again, different points of view about the invasion.
Yeah, I saw both of them. But it was an invasion of an island, wasn't it?
Well, it's the invasion. No, the invasion of the mainland, having taken a number of the smaller islands that were.
But we never invaded the mainland.
No, but this was if you like, I suppose what they did is they retold the story. Or Eastwood did, whereby the whole of Japan was erased, as it was mainly wood. When they bombed it, it burnt, and then to go and do what was done on top of that was not necessarily. It's what to do with these single-minded people, because they had one purpose, if you like, whether they were on a little island or whether they were on the mainland, is that, as the Chinese have since found out, is that they don't operate outside the parameter of their reality. And
as a country, I mean, there are many individuals who do, but as a country, no.
Exactly.
You can't go up against it. A
minute there's money involved and you go in there with money and you're not wanting to rule them, they'll work with you. I mean, but they'll, if you go outside the bracket of what's right for them. But that, I have to say, I mean, it's the same as London. We'd have a lot of trouble with, there's 3 or 4 different police forces in London, and they're all dealing with different parts of the corrupt, bit like the FBI and the CIA and the police, etc. There's the same thing applying in London. And if you've got the situation with, excuse me 1 minute, hold on. If you've got film crews again, if they hadn't done the preamble, the contacting those that were in charge of each different part of London, and you crossed some of the locals that are a lot of them mafia based. When I say a lot, I'm talking of the people running the money, and it's God Almighty, Chelsea and Fulham, which is your where your rich kids end up with their beautiful place, and it's been in the family several years. It's full of Italian mafia, and in the coffee shops and stuff, and they're fine until you cross them. If you cross them, God help you. I mean, they make your life and your house, everything starts to go wonky in your life.
Yeah.
I think what you're talking about in Japan and Southeast Asia is more in your face, but it's definitely present in London, and I know New York and LA. Christ, when we were working in LA, in Mexico, Jesus, the extraordinary reaction if you cross somebody's, if you made a mistake, basically, and you didn't own it, then you were going to get hammered one way or another. You would end up having to really pay your way out of trouble if you had the money present on you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In Japan, the Yakuza, I might have called them the mafia. We were calling them all mafia. The Yakuza in Japan was very involved. I lived in Japan 30 years ago, so I don't know about now, but they were very involved with the film industry. And to the extent that one of my very favorite Japanese filmmakers who wouldn't deal with them committed suicide jumping out of a building. Yeah. Yeah.
They produce some of the most beautiful film. Jeez.
Oh, God, such great films there. Well, so you came here. Huh?
Then came Bali, 12-step group, Al-Anon.
Yeah.
Started to have workshop. We had workshops once a week on step meetings and how to gain if you like, there were no sponsors as such because there were 4 women in one group in the Al-Anon in the Ruko when I first came, and I joined it, and it changed, not because of my present, well, probably because I was a male involved with 4 women that were having pretty much like a tea meeting. There were no steps or traditions adhered to as such. It was more how they were dangerously seeking to damage their partner one way or another, as far as I could make out. We started some workshops which transmitted to young people that there was a way to deal with what is quite a large ice and cocaine and heroin problem on these islands, if you like. And but Bali's got loads of it, and it, as a result, we ended up, with 20 people coming to the workshops, which meant the meetings, the Bali Al-Anon meetings suddenly grew, and there were different secretaries, and we had a step meeting once a week, blah 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 blah, and the people from Ubud, we crossed over with Ubud as well, and then introduced Coda and used the same thing with Coda, which was simply to set up a meeting based on 12 steps. And it it works if you show up, and if you don't react to nobody pitching up for a bit. As long as you're there for the first 30 minutes, at which time I would close a meeting if I was on my own, for the first 3 weeks or so. And then suddenly there'd be one, and then two, and then suddenly 2 to 6, 6 to 12. And you realize that the word was being transmitted not through any other way than individuals valuing their experience when they went there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they shared with their mates and stuff and said, listen, you know, I'm sharing stuff that I would never share with my mum, my dad, or my partner, or anybody in that room, and it's not going anywhere. And I feel, you know, I feel safe, basically. I think that's what it is. It's what these 12 steps, I mean, they came across a very powerful, wonderful, simple guide to gaining some greater degree of understanding of increasing our conscious contact with ourselves primarily, and therefore what surrounds us, general nature of things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so that's pretty much it. The meeting and sponsees and sponsors and all of that stuff started to flourish, and then goes through ups and downs. It's on a bit of a low at the moment with COVID, but I'm sure that'll restructure as the messenger and
Zoom.
The Zoom meetings probably will carry on. Actually, I mean, they're bloody good. The Zoom worked very well, and it'll be interesting to see how it all works out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, look, this has been really great. I really appreciate it. We're going on an hour and a half now. That's probably that's a nice length for a podcast.
Well, you should do 3 hours, David.
I have done 3-hour ones.
I've really enjoyed chatting with you here, and it's interesting. Every time I share something with another, I'm learning.
Yeah, I understand.
From a different point of view every time. Yeah. And there was already a primer in terms of Katrinka and the steps and the common goal.
Yeah.
But thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm really glad you talked about the 12-step stuff, because a lot of people won't, because it's anonymous and all that.
Right.
And I've done some other podcasts with people in the program and talked to them about whether they wanted to talk about it or not. And, Alice did, and some other people did. Oren did. Yeah, that's, it's, I think it's a good thing to talk about, let people know about. I think you did a really nice job with it. But, all right.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And
okay.
Look forward to have a great day.
Yeah, you too. Take care. Bye-bye. Well, thank you very much, Jonathan. I look forward to the next installment of Life with Jonathan Haak. Or maybe it's Haak. Well, Haak sounds more British, and that's the way they pronounce A's here. But there's 2 A's. It's H-A-A-K. So here they'd pronounce it Haak. So I'll have to ask him. Or he'll have to remind me, probably. So until then, this is DC. Pubav, Cuke Archives and Cuke Audio, coming to you from Sleepy Sanur with Dogette Bandita, Feline Cuchita, and dear lovely Katrinka. And we're wishing you and yours and all of us a grand awakening.